So then we're just going to go ahead and move on into the zoning update that we have undertaken. And I'll just go ahead and introduce Bonnie Franson from Nelson, Pope, and Voorhees.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So for those of you who may or may not be familiar with the document, there is a planning and engineering report for the redevelopment of the town center. It was prepared and it was also adopted as an addendum to the comprehensive plan. As a result, when you have a plan that's adopted as your comprehensive plan, any future zoning must be in accordance with that plan. Just as a reminder to everybody, the recommendations that are in that planning and engineering report, and in particular with regard to design, the vision for this area, and potential zoning, really came about from public open house workshops, one which was held on June 19th, 2017. And we did want to remind everybody what the takeaways were from that process. And essentially, town participants indicated they wanted to create a unique town center. Key words are that they wanted it to be pedestrian friendly, have businesses, restaurants, specialty food stores, small shops, and mixed housing options, and community uses such as outdoor event space and farmers market space. So really a center that has a lot of vitality to it, a lot of energy to it, where you can visit it as your town center. The vision for the town center must be unique, reflect the area's history, which is very important in the town of Hyde Park, given, again, the historic properties here and its history. Be family friendly, well designed, and attractive. What came out of this process, again, was an indication that the town really wanted something beyond just simply rezoning and allowing uses, but something that allows buildings that are going to be attractive and create an attractive environment for all those who visit the town center. When the vision statement was prepared for the planning report, and a vision really is how you envision this area 10 to 20 years out. If it were developed in the way that you see, that you envision as the best for the town, this little exercise said, well, what are the words that you would put in a vision statement that would define this particular area? And so you can see, again, the words such as walkable, retail, family-friendly, community, historic, restaurants, shops, farmers markets, parks, art. Those are all guiding words when considering how to zone ultimately and prepare land use regulations for this area to achieve the vision. So during the public open house workshops, individuals were allowed to walk around to various stations and really provide input into the type of not just land uses but building forms that the town envisioned for this area. And so one important aspect of the zoning process was that the town indicated that housing should be a part of any kind of town center plan. And in particular, the responses pointed out apartments over retail, so a more traditional downtown environment where you have retail on the ground floor and apartments above. And then you also like the concept of live-worked loft space, which again is retail, artisans involved, and living in a particular building. In addition, when the community was asked to look at its preferences for retail and commercial uses, the kinds of images that the community chose were a Main Street environment. You're not looking to recreate the types of commercial centers that have been built in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where really they're standalone shopping centers, where parking is in the front of the buildings, you know, your more conventional centers, but you're really looking to create something that's new. There also is a lot of discussion that the town center should include some visitor-related tourism-type uses, whether that be outdoor event space, having a farmer's market, again, for both the community but also for visitors, having outdoor shops and small retail shops. And again, in terms of design, the community had the opportunity to look at various images of what might be appropriate within this town center. And some of the images that you selected really show multi-story buildings, not single-story. set close to the sidewalk. You're not looking for buildings that are set far back with the parking in the front. If you look at the images that you prefer, it's really buildings that are fronting to a sidewalk or a small landscape yard. You seek mixed-use buildings. Again, that was very popular, commercial and residential. Parking that is screened. Again, we don't want to see, vehicles and vehicle access in the front of the buildings. Residential and non-residential buildings designed with appropriate compatible architecture. So the architecture did mean something to the residents. You don't want to see flat, boring facades. You want to see facades that have given due consideration to some of the historic architecture that is here within the town. And so all of these thoughts and public preferences we need to address as part of any comprehensive rezoning effort for this area. So as part of this 2018 into 2019 zoning process, we looked at the town center vision that was expressed in the planning and engineering report, and we prepared a memorandum that went beyond focusing on the shopping areas and the shopping center redevelopment, but really looked at a little bit more holistically properties that were within the area, what should be included in this new zoning district, what made sense. And so we looked at things such as zoning boundaries of the existing zones. We reviewed the existing land uses and building patterns. We reviewed that area that's to be sewered, the historic building patterns and themes. We extensively reviewed with this committee many images of different housing types, different commercial types, to really vet and determine what would be appropriate for the town center zone. And the P&E report and the vision memo become a basis for the proposed zoning. Just like the engineering planning report got adopted as an amendment to the comprehensive plan, this vision memo will also amend the comprehensive plan to further detail the intent of the zoning that's going to get adopted. So the document that's been prepared and their design and development standards for what is now called the Town Core Zoning District has some guiding principles that are key to guiding the planning board, the town board, the ZBA, and other officials who are tasked with enforcing the land use regulations and the zoning regulations. So these principles include compact mixed-use development, a mix of housing styles, types, and sizes with higher density within the town center and higher than other areas of the town. Generally, no too narrow front yard setbacks, again, so you create that downtown walkable environment. Greater setbacks for garages and accessory structures. You want those behind the buildings, not in front of the buildings. A human scale building design and configuration. Whatever gets built has to make sense for the town center. It can't be overly large for your community. Orientation of buildings to the street. Again, you don't want to see parking oriented to the street. You want to see your buildings oriented to the street. System of interconnected streets, not with the creation of single access points, which ultimately will become traffic problems. We need to have a gridded and appropriately connected system of streets to be able to handle any kind of traffic. Streets will have sidewalks, bike paths, transit offerings, again, pedestrian amenities and connectivity, which were really addressed by GPI in terms of some of the improvements that are envisioned for Albany Post Road and the study area. Landscaping of parking lots and public spaces, and then importantly, incorporation of significant historic and scenic features into the site design. Again, looking to our existing buildings for historic precedent. So these are some of the images that were referenced when we were started to put the zoning document together. These are precedent images, and they get to some of the preferred building types that the town envisions for this town core area based on scale. One of the conclusions of the process was ultimately the town prefers to see something that's not larger than 3 stories. There's less concern about size of the buildings. As you can see, row-style buildings will end up being longer. We're more interested in the building type and the building pattern than the size itself. We want the appropriate frontage and relationship to the street. there are frontage requirements that talk about the need to have porches and to have stoops and to have entrances to retail areas that are friendly. It's called the public and private realm, and you want to have a relationship with each other rather than having, let's say, blank walls to the street. You need to have that relationship between your building in the private realm and your streetscape in the public realm. And then the architecture ultimately is very important. So this map shows the limits of what is now going to be the proposed town core zoning district. Generally, it's the purplish looking area that's in the center of that map, and it extends from about Harvey Street to the north. It includes the parcels that mostly front to Albany Post Road, with some additional parcels that are needed to provide some expanded lots as the area evolves. It ends at Van Dam Road to the south, and then what is right now the TCHD district, the Town Center Historic District, will be renamed to Corridor Business. There are three important aspects to the new regulations, and they are this regulating plan, building types, and architecture. So first, the town core is not this ubiquitous one zone where everything is allowed everywhere within it. There is now a regulating plan that has sub-areas. And within each of these sub-areas, which appear in color on this map, you're allowed different building types. One of the takeaways during the process is the town is less concerned to some extent about the uses. They care more about what the buildings are. And so if you're in something called the P1 district, which is primarily the frontage along Albany Post Road between Pine Woods going south, that is going to allow different building types than if you're in the PW2, which sits behind it. And it's really to create this downtown environment. So within each of these sub areas, we've called out what type of building is allowed within each of the sub areas. And it goes from row style shop front or traditional shop front all the way to single family detached dwellings and public gathering spaces. This is an example of the building type standards. So here, this is our traditional shop front, and we have examples of buildings that would meet that type of building type pattern. So there, again, this is a guiding document for any developer or land use person who wants to come along and develop or redevelop the parcels within the town core area. We have the story and height requirements, and they're actually even by feet per floor. There's specific dimensions which create a much more authentic, typical downtown than other dimensions. We talk about which of the sub-areas this particular building type is allowed within, frontage encroachments, lot requirements, specific standards, again, with regard to window patterns, the facade, how it should be articulated so that it's just not a flat, blank wall. I want to really call out and let the public know that Dutchess County Planning really helped out with putting some of these standards together. Heather Lavarnway is right back here, and she really helped bring this whole document together in terms of its organization. So then the third element, we talked about the town core and its sub-areas, and then we talk about the building types that are going to be allowed within the sub-areas. Lastly, the architectural patterns are equally as important. And while we don't expect everything to look exactly authentic to its historic precedent, you can have a modern version of this historic precedent. The zoning acknowledges and the design standards acknowledge that there are certain types of architecture that's historic and appropriate for the town because it already exists in the town or it exists in one of the nearby communities. So these are just two examples. There's about 8 within the design standards. This happens to be Greek Revival and Carpenter Gothic. The architectural patterns discuss that the architecture will draw from historic precedent, but it can be a modern expression of same. New construction and rehabilitation should reflect these traditional architectural patterns, and there are many standards that talk about the massing, the roofing, the preferred materials, the wall facade, what they should incorporate in terms of materials. Again, a lot of guidance for the boards who ultimately will be implementing the zoning regulations. So all of these design and development standards are incorporated into this document, which will be an attachment to the zoning. It's referred to as the design and development standards for the town core zoning district. At this point in the process, we're beginning the zoning review and adoption process. Importantly, sort of the kind of a last comment with regard to these design and development standards is we acknowledge that there's going to be a transitional period. These designs, this type of development intensity and density really relies on having sewers. And so there is a building waiver process until such time that the sewers are in place, acknowledging that it may not be possible when a building needs to accommodate septic systems on the lot, the exact pattern we may not be able to fulfill right away. Also, there are institutional buildings. There may be a building which simply doesn't fit one of these building types. That also would go through the building waiver process. So I think these design and development standards have been created, again, recognizing where we are in the process and recognizing that there has to be a transitional time period to be able to enact them. But even if the building can't be placed exactly where you want it on the lot, there are other standards that still should be followed, including architectural and other standards. At this point in the process, the town is really seeking your input. This is a draft. Certainly, the public's comments and your thoughts as far as what are in these standards are being sought to make it a better document. And we welcome your questions with regard to the proposed zoning. Thank you. So the question is, what is the relationship and impact of the sewer line? So at this point in time, much of the town core district doesn't have sewer. And so to be able to accommodate development, development right now will have to accommodate a septic system, an in-ground system. And so because of the requirements, health department requirements, separation distances from other again, just health department requirements for separation between buildings, wells, et cetera, although I think this is mostly public water, it may result in the pattern that's desired really not being met. And we have to be pragmatic while we're in a phase where the sewers aren't in place yet, and that's the purpose of this building waiver process.
What's good about having so much specificity in your zoning? Because I think that's, sometimes
Yeah.
people think, well, that's a lot
Right.
of requirements, but what's the benefit of that?
Well, I think the benefit, I know having represented developers and people who come in as applicants, sometimes the standards are very generalized. And as a result, when they are generalized, they may feel that a planning board is asking them for to design a project in a certain way, and they ask why, because they don't see it in a document, essentially. And here, it really takes away that guessing game. A developer who comes in to build will know exactly what they're allowed to build. And certainly, these particular standards are not looking to limit development. They're actually looking to regulate what it looks like. And as you can see from the images, we're not talking about small buildings. We're talking really about creating a beautiful, traditional downtown within especially the Pine Woods and Albany Post Road intersection. And then as you move out from it, which is why we have these sub areas, it starts to, the density intensity starts to transition down to the point where you get, again, to the single-family neighborhoods. You don't want the downtown row building set up against, right next to certain neighborhoods, because it wouldn't be appropriate. These zoning standards also acknowledge that the desire to keep some of these historic buildings that you see on Albany Post Road, they may not be identified as being on the National Register or in a historic district. They're not your Vanderbilt mansion, but yet they are from the 1800s, and they do have a beauty to them and an authenticity to them that the standards recognize and want to retain even if they get redeveloped. So the zoning really acknowledges that as well.
Just to remind everyone, this is just the beginning of the local law process. There will be ample time and lots of time to provide comments, and encourage people to take a look at the plan and the zoning on the website. And, we'll be setting a public hearing later on in the meeting tonight. So, yeah, it's a lot to absorb all at once, so we welcome your comments and look forward to them. And, as Bonnie mentioned, it is a draft document, and when exposed to other minds, it often ends up a much better document, and so we look forward to that.